Hi, I'm Meta Spencer, and today I get to talk to a friend who's an expert on many things that I know nothing whatever about. But that makes it much more interesting to have a conversation, and I might even learn a thing or two from her. That's my general aspiration. Her name is Rebecca Fannin, and she is actually, I know her mostly as the wife of a very old friend, but I follow her activities insofar as I can, given the fact that she's in the world of business and I know nothing about business. But she's a journalist who covers business matters for various financial magazines and newspapers, and has covered a lot of stories and written books about China and India. And for a long time, she was spending, I think, more time in India than she was in China, more than India, I should say.
Yeah.
Now let's see. For a moment, I had a list up here of your books, but I think it's gone away. So I can only remember two of them actually by title. One was Titans of China. Is that what was the title?
That's pretty close. Tech Titans of China.
All right, Tech Titans. Yeah.
Tech Titans of China.
That was a book called The Silicon Dragon, which was a really neat title for a book.
Yeah.
You can guess what that's about, you know.
Tech Titans was 2019. And there was one in between those, which was called Startup Asia, which was more about India than other parts of Asia. So anyhow, the new book
is, I know the title, at least the first title, is Silicon Heartland.
Yeah.
Does it have a subtitle?
It does. Transforming the Midwest from Rust Belt to Tech Belt.
Yeah, it's really a neat idea. And that's where I hope to learn something from you. I know that you're from Ohio, so you're a Heartland girl.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe going home to visit, you discovered there are a lot of things going on there that you hadn't expected. Is that how this book came about? Or because I don't know anybody who has written arguing that America's Midwest is becoming something like a Silicon Valley. So you're going to start at the top. Just teach me what's in that book.
I was going to China regularly, and
I think you were probably in China more than you were in, and mostly you were based in Silicon Valley when you were in the U.S., right?
Yeah,
uh-huh.
yeah. So then COVID hit.
Yeah. So what do you do to fill your time?
March 2020. My last trip to China was January 2020. And then, I could not go back to China and unless I wanted to quarantine for a month or a couple of weeks. And I didn't want to do that. And there was nothing going on anyhow. There were no live events, and very hard to get any news. And meantime, I had been going back regularly to my homeland area and seeing progress being made. Like, for instance, the Columbus area, we used to call it Cowtown, cows and Cowtown and the state fair. But now today, it really is booming with a lot of millennials and a lot of tech innovation, and venture capital is moving in even from Silicon Valley. So we are seeing that Columbus is booming, a 15% population increase in the 10-year period ending 2020.
Why? You must have a theory about what is causing this shift.
Yeah, I mean, there's a need for new kinds of jobs to come in. If you stay stagnant, you're going to be left behind. So this idea that you have to be able to disrupt your own economy and bring in new talent, bring in new ideas, bring in new money, bring in jobs that are going to replace all the kinds of jobs that went overseas, that went to China, all the factory jobs, the steel jobs, the the coal, the energy jobs, all of this has been displaced in the Midwest over, the Midwest was the industrial heartland. And then it became the Rust Belt.
Yeah.
Everything rusting out because all the a lot of factories closed. People were unemployed, poverty, poor education, all these issues. Societal issues remain, opioid overdose, and these crimes and very bad situation. So something had to change. And so we started to see, the state economic development groups getting behind it. Technology is an innovator. It brings in new jobs. Technology brings in new jobs, and so that's the shift that's going on, and it's happening.
But it's one thing to want high tech to come in. It's another thing to get it to do so.
Yes.
I mean, in a way, you're answering why the Midwest would be very happy to have high-tech companies come, but
Right.
it doesn't quite answer my question, which is, why would the high-tech companies want to go to your hometown?
Well, you may have seen the news about Intel, the big semiconductor company that makes the chips that go into all of our electronic
Actually,
devices.
I have a niece who worked many years for Intel.
Oh, okay.
But that's in Sacramento.
Well, it's in Silicon Valley, yeah. And now they are investing $20 billion into a new chip production facility outside Columbus. It's now an agricultural area that I actually visited recently and saw the construction site for this new chip making.
How much investment?
20 billion.
Billion?
Yeah.
I didn't understand. I wasn't sure that I heard the word billion.
I know. It is an awful lot. And,
wow.
and they're the only one.
I'm always having to remind myself the difference between a million and a billion. And then start thinking in terms of a trillion, and then I really have trouble.
I know. It does require your mind to wrap around it a little bit. So I've been there. But they're not the only ones. Google has moved in, Facebook has moved in. We're seeing in Pittsburgh, for instance, Pittsburgh, a lot of this has to do with the institutions that are behind it too. So for instance, in Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, it's an artificial intelligence center. It has groomed a lot of the engineers that are making all those algorithms work in our computers and our social media posts. A lot of talent came out of Carnegie Mellon.
I was aware that it's a tech center. Yeah.
Yeah. So now, because of this AI focus, there's a lot of AI startups in Pittsburgh today that are centered on autonomous driving. That's kind of the future of transportation.
Oh, yeah.
Self-driving vehicles. And, Pittsburgh is behind this in a big way.
I've been writing in which I say something that I've heard, but I have no way of gauging it, that within 5 years, we're going to be seeing driverless taxis that are electric.
Yeah.
5 years?
China has them. China already has them.
And they're driverless and they're electric.
Yeah, and they're taxis. Right. Robo-taxis.
Now that's
robo-taxis.
It's going to make the difference. If that becomes the main vehicle, if they do it on a big scale, nobody's going to want to own a car. I mean, why would you want to own a car when those are going to be cheaper and safer and just as convenient? And so you should not want a car. So I've been writing about trees, that we ought to plant trees in all of those parking spots.
Yeah.
But that's why I'm asking about the timeline, because I want to know how fast we can give up those parking spots.
Yeah, it's an issue of safety. Um, these companies have to meet very strict safety requirements. There's a lot of testing going on right now in California, for instance, in isolated, in campuses, for instance, or at airports, for instance. And in China, they've developed tech zones, even in Beijing and other cities where they're testing this idea. And in some cases, launching the idea. China is a little ahead of us on this front. But I think, yeah, it could be in 5 years. They have to get there were some accidents. There have been some accidents. And so they have to get it fail-proof. Or
yeah,
close to
my understanding is that the accidents have been minor compared to how many there would be for people driving their own cars. But
Yeah.
you can't have any,
Yeah.
It has to be perfect.
Yeah, if you have one, it gives the whole thing a bad reputation, and people say, "Oh, I'm not going near that." Where it could be a great thing for cities, for people, for our lifestyles.
Yeah, yeah. Good. I'm glad you. But I really didn't really dare. I was told 5 years, but I didn't dare put it in what I wrote because I thought people are going to not believe me. So I made it up. I said 10 to 15 years.
Well,
I really like to believe that 5 years we'll see it, begin to see it.
Yeah, there are several companies that are behind it.
Now, which companies?
Well, one of them is a Chinese company that's testing in the US called Pony.ai. Amazon is behind it. They have their own autonomous vehicle. Google is the big one that is behind it with their own self-driving vehicles. And you see them going around in Silicon Valley. You'll see them kind of on the highway and they're testing again. I don't know, maybe you see them where you are too.
No.
You don't?
Well, I shouldn't say a thing because I haven't been out of my apartment in 2.5 years, except to the dentist. But so I have no idea. But I never heard anybody say that they're doing it here, and I think I would know. They would put it in the newspaper, I'm sure. I think.
Yeah, or online. Yeah. Allow you to test drive it remotely, right? Online. Somehow.
Do they do that?
No, I don't think so, but it's just an idea that occurred to me.
Yeah. It was a good idea because it would get us, past our apprehension. People, I imagine a lot of people who are not going to get into one of those things. It doesn't look right.
I've been in them. I've been a passenger. And it's an interesting experience.
Now, do you talk to it, or how do you tell it where you want to go?
You do talk to it, yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Actually, in some of these experiments, they still have somebody monitoring it who's sitting inside the vehicle. And so they still have that safety precaution of having a real person sitting in the passenger seat or sitting at the steering wheel, but not operating anything, but sitting there. So, but yeah, in the true driverless, you would say, yes, take me to Mission Point or take me to Starbucks or whatever.
What else can it understand? I mean, if you change your mind, you say, now let's drop off and pick me up a cup of coffee and you wait here while I go in there. Complicated conversations. Can it handle things like that?
Well, I think that would be a matter of it being trained. You see, with algorithm, it's all about training, right?
No.
When you're with a customer service call, those automatrons, they're trained to respond to certain things. So
last night I had my cell phone on or something. It's a new cell phone and I'm not acquainted with it. And I said a dirty word, and she said, "I don't know how to respond to that."
Oh, really?
I was thinking, well, now if you were my driver, you'd have to figure it out.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, so that's a case where, the algorithms are all trained.
Yeah.
These little things, those little monsters that live in there, they're trained to respond to
Uh,
certain cues.
okay, I deflected you in the. So
Well,
let's go back to I guess Ohio and Pittsburgh and Carnegie. I mean Mellon.
Carnegie Mellon.
Car-
So, for
Car-
instance, yeah, Stanford University was a big driver, and Berkeley, which you know very well, were big drivers of Silicon Valley.
uh-huh.
MIT and Harvard, big drivers of what happened in Boston. So the three major hubs have been Silicon Valley, New York City, and Boston, and they're all
Right.
have been that way for a number of years. But now we're starting to see some momentum in the Midwest, in the heartland.
Huh.
And some of this is around the universities too, like Ohio State University in Columbus, University of Michigan, Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland is driving a lot of biotech innovation. Cincinnati has Procter and Gamble, major company, driving a lot of innovation that's happening around Cincinnati. And Amazon is in Cincinnati as well. So, it's interesting. You're seeing these tech clusters develop. For instance, in Indianapolis, which I visited a number of heartland cities. I'll show you the map in a minute, but of all the places I went to.
Well, go ahead. Why not?
Yeah, you want to see the map?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me do my share screen then. There's the map.
Okay, that's where.
That is.
Oh no, that I'm looking at you, wondering where you are. Sand Hill Road.
Oh yes, that's me standing outside on a county road outside my hometown with Sand Hill Road.
Okay, what's your hometown again?
Lancaster. I'm circling it here. Can you see me circling it?
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's Lancaster.
And Lancaster, is that a Mennonite or of an Amish or something?
No, but there are a lot of Amish in between here and Youngstown.
Oh,
But there are a lot of Amish in this area all throughout here. But yeah, so I circled around Pittsburgh, Youngstown, Cleveland, Toledo, Ann Arbor, Flint, Detroit. But it shows you the Great Lakes. So, a lot of this industry was around the Great Lakes. So you have Cleveland and Flint and Detroit and or they were around rivers, Pittsburgh, Rivertown, Cincinnati is a river town.
Now we have always heard in Toronto, we're very conscious, or at least the people I know are conscious of Detroit as a place that really went down the tubes, but it's sort of recovering a little.
Right.
Is Detroit the worst of the Rust Belt?
Well, it's one of the worst. Yeah, it's actually a very large city.
Yeah.
Where it lost about 1/3 of its population. And there is a high poverty rate there. A lot of industries left. A lot of auto industry plants closed. I was there just recently. Again, I've been there 3 or 4 times in the last 2 years. So you still see, for instance, the old Packard plant still standing, but with weeds growing up all over it. But there's a lot of energy in Detroit. There's a very, kind of a hip vibe about it. There's a lot of young people have moved in and see the opportunity to transform it. So I visited some tech hubs, a place called Tech Town, which is in the center of Detroit. Then you also see that Ford, one of the major auto companies, has actually purchased the old train station, and it was shut for years. And Amtrak used to go through and stopped going through a long time ago. It's just been sitting there, vacant. But they're transforming that into an autonomous vehicle research hub now. So you do see Detroit coming back, and there are these champions. I call them the champions, the town champions, who come in, like Dan Gilbert, who's transforming all of downtown Detroit. A lot of Detroit was just demolished. It was so bad off, they just demolished it. So there's a lot of new building going on in Detroit.
I think a few years ago, Anthony Bourdain did a show set in Detroit,
Oh, yeah.
which showed a lot of the old beaten up places, and then other things, people on their front lawn with a little, food stand of some kind that they were.
Yeah, I'll show you, some of the sites that along those lines. Here we have Pittsburgh, Flint, and Youngstown. So all three of these were hit very hard by the industrial decline of America. And that's me in front of the last standing steel mill in Pittsburgh, the last operating one in Pittsburgh out of all those steel plants that operated. This is the Carnegie Steel, where Carnegie Mellons or Carnegie started. That's me standing in front of.
Now, where, when they closed these steel mills, did they all go to China, or where all did they go?
Yeah, a lot of them did go to China, and the auto factories too. Yeah, they went to Asia, and things changed. And Japan became an automotive center. Korea is now an automotive center. But China is still making a lot of American brands made in China.
This old house here, where's that?
What's that? Oh,
This
that's why I brought that up, because that's outside of Youngstown. That's a very common sight still, but less, more and more. You're just seeing the empty lots. You can see there.
Looks like it would be past rehabilitation.
It is. That's why they're just demolishing them.
They're just tearing them down. Okay.
Yeah, they just tear them down. So they have in Detroit, they put ribbons on them to signify what's going to happen to them. It'll be demolished or somehow renovated. But there's large tracts of Detroit that have, and other towns that they have just totally, it's better just to get rid of it.
Probably Toronto is they demolish perfectly new buildings.
Oh, yeah.
All this time, you have these beautiful buildings that are maybe 10 years old, and they tear them down and put something new up. I don't get it.
Yeah, Toronto looks so new. I mean, I was there. I think the last time I was there was for the launch of Tech Titans of China, and it just looked so well. It looked newer than any U.S. city I could think of.
Maybe.
Yeah, all those new buildings, those new skyscrapers. It's amazing. But anyhow, here in Flint, you could still see the old sign, Flint Vehicle City. It's,
I remember Michael Moore writing this film about Flint, and I guess he's from Flint.
Yes,
and it made a wonderful, hilarious movie. But I'm not sure they've ever actually completely corrected the problem. It was about water being polluted.
Yeah, the water.
And the government was not doing anything about it. But from all I know, maybe it's fixed a little bit, but I'm not even sure it's 100% over. What do you know?
Yeah, well, it's been a long-standing issue, and a lot of the Flint residents still don't drink the water, the local water. They switched the water supply back, and they have done all kinds of remedies. But there's the confidence and the trust is gone. So what's interesting about that is I want to show you. Hold on. What's happened as a result of some of this trauma. This lady here in the yellow dress, very fashionable. She lives in Flint. She's a Fashion Institute of Technology grad from New York City, moved back to Flint. She's originally from Detroit. Moved to Flint and set up a business that is using all those recycled water bottles, because the Flint residents all went to water bottles. They bottled water. They were not drinking the local supply. So all these bottles were being, tossed aside. She built a whole new business out of recycled water bottles, and she's making eyeglasses.
Oh, really?
Yeah, eyeglasses out of recycled water bottles. So that's
Frames? Just the frames, or is she making the lenses too?
she's not making the lenses. She's getting them from a supplier, but she has a whole business built on these eyeglasses.
I guess you can't make plastic eyeglasses that are really corrective lenses, are they?
I guess not. Maybe it has to be glass, but
Yeah.
yeah, she good for her.
Uh-huh.
And so from hard times
Yeah.
come new ideas, come innovation, and
Yeah.
that's one of the issues that's happening in the Rust Belt. That from hardships, sometimes new ideas filter through.
So who are these folks on the other photo?
Well, this guy is in. He's the owner of a 3D. I mean, 3D factory in outside of Youngstown, and it's an old family business.
I'm sorry, a 3D what? Like
Well,
printing, I think.
yeah, 3D printing.
Oh,
They're making things out of these little machines out of computerized 3D printing, like MakerBot, except but on a much bigger
well, I don't think I've ever seen one, but I know that they're even building houses with a 3D idea. I don't know. But now what's in the background? Looks like,
well, very interesting. There's a lot of sandbags in the background because they're making these molds from sand castings and then 3D printing these industrial parts that are going into things like aircraft and tractors. But this is an old foundry business, and all the foundry business was devastated in the U.S. But also a large part of it went overseas. So now with this 3D printing, it's a new technique, that is being used in industry and in factories. So his operation now is shifted to 3D printing.
Okay.
And he managed to keep his family business alive.
Oh, really?
Alive and well. Yeah, I did an article on 3D printing I write for CNBC a lot now. So I did an article on this company and others like Goodyear that is using 3D printing in making tires.
They're making tires of 3D?
From 3D printing, they make some tires. The same thing with Boeing. Boeing aircraft
really?
Has some parts made through 3D printing. Yeah, I learned a lot in researching this book about industry.
Great. Okay.
Yeah. So, well, anyhow. Oh, I did mention the Intel plant before. So this is a photos I took recently of the Intel construction site.
Now, I understand that in the new, is it called the Inflation Reduction Bill?
Yeah.
It's just passed.
Yeah.
I think that includes a lot for chips. I've forgotten the correct word for it.
Yeah.
But they're going to be, I guess they felt that they were getting too dependent on foreign sources,
right,
for computers.
Yeah.
And so they're going to try to promote it. Now, is this that the government is? How does that work? Is the government going to fund outfits like Intel, or what? Why do they need special government money to help them boost in chips?
Well, I think it's a good question. Actually, the state of Ohio, I'm sure, gave out big handouts to attract this Intel plant because it's going to boost the economy there regionally. But yeah, I mean, you would think that this is just a private enterprise. It should just be private enterprise. But for something significant like this, where you have a lot of the chip making also moved to China.
Well, there must be some,
and Taiwan.
You probably can answer why they moved in the first place. Why did all the steel mills shut down and go to China? What was, even off the top, I would have thought that wouldn't pay because steel is heavy. And you making it in China, even if you save a few bucks on the labor, you're going to have that transportation cost to bring it back to the US. That can't be, I would have thought that doesn't make sense, but obviously I'm mistaken. Why did they close anyway?
Well, it has to do with cost, labor cost.
It was mostly labor.
Well, that's part of it. Yeah. There was a lot of friction between factories and labor unions. And there were riots over these. If you look into it, it's really quite interesting. How violent it became actually. But anyhow, we did see a lot of jobs move for cost reasons. And look, these economies overseas were starting to boom locally. So it wasn't just a matter of export import. It was build it here, and make that steel here, and then construct something from that steel, whether it's making cars there or making buildings there, and within these booming areas. But it is interesting that a large part of it did move to these big companies out of Taiwan. There's two major companies out of Taiwan. It's not just mainland China, but Taiwan. It's the bigger one of the two of these chip making producers, and they were funded in part by the government and in part by private money as well. So companies like Intel are, for their own future prosperity, they have to respond. They have to be proactive. And Columbus area is not the only place where they're building new plants. I mean, I think it's a real positive for the U.S. economy. And the government realizes that this is a very important industry for the U.S. to own. Mm-hmm. And so, it actually became an issue with the construction here. Intel paused construction of this new factory area while the chip bill was working its way through Congress. Oh. And then once it was passed, they ramped up.
Well, now look, if it hadn't passed, would they have stopped the construction, or would they?
Well, they did pause it. They did pause it, so it was iffy. But whether they, I think they really do need that federal government money. Okay. And they need that state money too to make it work financially.
Well, now what is this? I don't know anything about this, but if some of the companies have moved to Taiwan and some of the companies have moved to China, then that may have some implications in terms of U.S. foreign policy. It may tilt our interests in various directions. That I hadn't thought about. Is that really something that people talk about? And when they're talking about foreign policy and how much support to give to Taiwan, how much would that have to do, you think, with the fact that we have some companies there now?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think it is a factor. And with the semiconductor, the two major semiconductor manufacturers, producers, both in Taiwan, and you see congressional leaders going to Taiwan over China. I think it does influence policy. definitely.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
business and policy, they go together,
You know,
right?
they used to say that if you have a lot of trade with another country, that inhibits war. And I don't know anymore. It looks like it may sometimes, like the trade between the Russian export of oil and gas to Europe now,
yeah,
and all of the that didn't save them from conflict at all.
no, no,
Anyway,
no.
side
Often,
conversation.
well, we have a lot of trade with China, but there's an awful lot of friction with China
Yeah,
too,
yeah.
over various issues, human rights issues, environmental issues. So, yeah, there, there's the upside and the downside.
Okay, so what else have we got here? Looks like
Well, let's see what other. I think. Well, what I want to say too is, we're a little early in the Silicon Heartland journey. We're still a little early in it, but I like to be early. I was pretty early in predicting that China was going to be, a factor in technology innovation.
mhm.
And back then, nobody believed me, as this crazy journalist who's on the ground in China seeing all this and reporting back, but they weren't on the ground like I was seeing it. So now I've been on the ground in my own grassroots area of the heartland, and I'm seeing it firsthand. So I think I'm on the leading edge here again. But
Ah,
I would also say that it's early. There still needs to be a lot more success stories and more heroes coming out of the heartland. Like we saw Steve Jobs, he's still a hero. Everybody still worships him.
ooh.
Now I guess it's Elon Musk, right? It's Elon Musk. But
Elon Musk is, yeah. Yeah, I was just in a meeting yesterday where somebody said we ought to invite Elon Musk to our event, our conference or something. I thought, really? I didn't get it. So
well,
he is an innovator. You have to give him credit for that,
oh yeah,
for sure.
extreme
Yeah,
in different fields.
yeah,
Um,
I know.
yeah, so that's interesting because I was I had also recommended Elon Musk for a conference for this China-U.S. Business Alliance conference, and then they were able to get this investor in Tesla, a major investor in Tesla. Instead of Elon Musk, they got the investor in Tesla this week. So
Yeah, uh-huh,
that's pretty good.
uh-huh. Yeah,
It was a
sure.
woman as well.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So
Okay.
anyhow, it needs to be a lot more venture capital and less reliance on state money for economic development. There needs to be more tech training. There needs to be this, idea of let's not just stagnate, but let's move ahead. It has to be
Okay,
part of
well,
society.
sorry, I interrupted.
No, it's okay. That's it. I'm just saying that there's still a lot that needs to happen.
Well, what I'm wondering is, it's also too early for you to answer this, so you can only guess. But what will happen culturally to the people living in this area when there is this technological
Yeah.
invasion?
Yeah.
Because a lot of my conversations really are with people who speculate, as I constantly do, about the causes of the right-wing movement,
Uh-huh.
the nutcases in the U.S. of
Yeah.
the Trump people and all that.
Yeah.
I'm just totally fascinated by and preoccupied with what's the matter with these people? What's the cause of this? And there are two different explanations that I think are not necessarily compatible. They're not necessarily incompatible either. But one of them is it's the Rust Belt. They've lost their economic well-being. They're poor. They're downtrodden. They've been miserable, and therefore they want Trump. Okay. The alternative is it's a cultural thing. They feel culturally discounted and derogated. They feel that nobody likes their rural or
Yeah.
old-fashioned values and
Yeah.
so on. Now, my friend Arlie and I just had an almost argument, Arlie Hochschild, who's writing about, the right wing, the neo-Nazis, really. Or at least she's trying to get close to the neo-Nazis. I don't know whether she's made it. But and she's the authority, so I don't have any right to have an opinion. But I do. I always have more than my share of opinions. And my opinion is that it really isn't economic, and that and partly my reasoning isn't just a gut sense. It's that I did some analysis of the exit polls after the election where Trump was elected. No, I think it was one of the elections. Yeah, it was Trump. And it was really clear there was no correlation with income, and there was no correlation with education until you get to the very post doctoral kind of level or professional level. People in IT or people in other professions, by and large, had more sympathy for Biden. And otherwise, it didn't make any difference in terms of education or income. And as a matter of fact, the supporters for Hillary had lower income than Trump supporters. So it's not the poor people went for Trump. It's, if anything, the Trump supporters were more prosperous. It wasn't much, but the point is it really wasn't the way people claim. So I say that this Rust Belt explanation, the economic explanation, is baloney, and that what you really have to look at is the ideas, the culture, and their sense of being disrespected, which I think they are disrespected because I personally disrespect them. I don't like their values, and I don't mind saying so. So tell me, if you bring in Silicon Valley to your hometown, are people going to change their values? And are we going to solve this problem of rural values as a revanchist movement?
Yeah. Well, you made me think of this sign that I spotted several times in traveling through the Rust Belt. In some of the most broken down places, you would see a sign, "Don't blame me, I voted for Trump." And a lot of Trump signs in the Rust Belt still today. It is interesting. I think there will be a cultural shift for these places that were stagnant or were falling behind, because new talent will come in, and new talent will be trained. There'll be people who will move in to take these new tech jobs, and
Right.
There'll be
will the people there change? I mean, if they don't move, if just the people staying there take these new jobs, and I would hope that some of these people could upgrade. For example, these coal miners, they really are under economic distress.
Sure.
And I would hope that they could be retrained to be, build solar panels or something,
Yeah, no, I mean, there are movements going on like that. For instance, at West Virginia University in Morgantown. Oh, I interviewed some of the drivers who were creating a new training centers at West Virginia University. In fact, it's funded by people who grew up in that area, but then they became tech titans in Silicon Valley, so they have plenty of money to pour back into their alma maters and set up new training centers and engineering centers. So that's a real positive. For instance, John Chambers, he's doing that.
Let's turn the thing off so I can see your face better. I like to look at you full screen.
You want to take the stop share?
I want to see you more.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Okay.
Okay. I have a few more photos to show later on.
Well, go ahead if you wanted. I thought you were.
I do. It is kind of. It also does pick up on this cultural thing too, because part of my trip was, I spent all this time on the road and interviewing all these people, but also it was interesting to me too, because I was discovering more about my own self. I realized I was kind of homesick for my own culture because I'd been away for so long. But anyhow, actually, this is just a second. I'll get to it. Forwards. So I ended up in Kentucky, and which is where my father's side of the family was, and that's my mother's side of the family here. The Gamp family home in Scioto County in southern Ohio. And it's also near where the car broke down finally, and I had to get new brakes. But it got new brakes on a Saturday afternoon in July. And then before that, visiting the Fannin side of the family in Kentucky, northern Kentucky, and that's John, who you know.
Yes, I certainly know John.
Yeah, he was there. He went to the Kentucky part of it, and that's me outside the barn, which is still standing outside the.
That's in Kentucky.
That's in northern Kentucky. But a part of this whole journey, the reason I bring these up and show these is because it brings up this whole cultural idea of okay, well, I left because I wanted to escape. I escaped immediately after graduation, and I went to New York City, and I started in publishing in New York City. But then I eventually I went to Silicon Valley too, because I'm always kind of searching for the next new thing, and then off to China. But even after all those years, I still was really drawn to my homeland region. The people. I could immediately hear their voices, and pick up.
Okay, I don't believe it.
Oh, really?
I believe you can hear their voices, but their values, I really, when I did this analysis of the exit polls, there was no connection to demographics to speak of. But what there was is connections to whether they were rural or urban. There was a huge difference between
rural or
rural and urban people are totally different. Black and white people, of course, are very different. But the main differences that had to do with values like gun ownership and whether same-sex marriage and abortion and should transsexuals be allowed to use whatever washroom they want, and things like that. These of course it would be reflected in the attitudes about COVID, and it was before the polls were before that, but the exit polls, I'm sure, if they covered COVID and mask wearing and vaccines and all of that, it would have shown up there too. These are people who live in the dark ages. And Rebecca, you do not live in the dark ages.
I don't live in the dark ages, but I relate to these people.
Yeah, well, Arlie does too.
I mean,
I can't get it. I mean, these people who think that way, and it's okay with you.
We didn't get it really into their political views, but it's more of a grassroots kind of connection. Of even my accent changed. I was around it enough. My accent became much more Southern. I slipped back into it. There's a whole different way of speaking. That I picked up on immediately. The work culture of these people. I mean, you can't. I really respect these people. They're very hardworking people of true grit, true authenticity. There's no fakeness about it. That's the real person who's there, and that's what you're gonna be confronted with. That's what you're gonna see is the person in front of you, not somebody who's trying to be something else, a facade. It's out in the Hamptons for the summer or whatever. Socializing and it's not of that. It's real no nonsense, true grit, and I really respect that.
Okay, I can get in with that. In fact, but of course, it isn't just rich people or sophisticated people who have a facade and are careful about what they say in what circles or in what settings.
Right.
They're some of my best friends are hypocrites. I mean, it's true. And I tend to get in trouble because I'm too blunt. And I think it maybe it's because I'm from Oklahoma or California, maybe a combination. And maybe you would, if you hung around my friends, you would also get in trouble because they might not like you to be so forthright.
Yeah.
Is that what you're pointing at?
Well, I'm talking about this snob effect. People on the coast think, New York, oh, that's the center of the world. Well, I'm sorry, it's not.
Okay.
Neither is Silicon Valley the center of the world. In fact, today, part of my book talks about the spread of Silicon Valley, to other places. And that also happened because of COVID. It was accelerated during COVID, this whole idea of remote working and being able to do the job no matter where you are. And so, yeah. So anyhow, I get what
I can sort of, I'm trying to find some points of convergence where we have an agreement. And I'm not sure. I think the notion of directness, and maybe that's not the crucial thing that you're talking about,
No,
but
I am.
cultural differences. I'm also pretty critical of wokeness,
Yeah.
And I think the whole criticism they have about political correctness, they've got a real point. I mean, there are some people who just bend over backwards I just had a terrible fight yesterday over the word they. A woman, a friend of mine, her daughter's just become a man. And I said, I'm willing to call her a male. I'm willing to say he or she, but I'm not willing to call her they because I protect the English language. And there's an important distinction between singular and plural. So I am not willing to use they in respect to one person, which means that, of course, I'm not politically correct.
Right.
Well, so that's kind of part of what I'm saying is that there is I can get sympathy for reactionaries, at least to that extent.
I see. Well, you made me just think of another story. Traveling throughout West Virginia and some of these Appalachian mountain areas. I think John was with me on this part of it. We stopped to ask directions for some place, and then we asked him how to spell it. I don't know why I would ask him how to spell it, but I did, and because he said it, and then I needed to get it in my head. And once I see the letters, I get the spelling, I know what it is. And he said, "Well, some people spell it with an E, and other people get by just fine without the E." Other people get by just fine without the E. Okay. So anyhow, it's a little bit of the culture that I kind of relate to.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can get by just fine without the E.
Okay. Well, do you feel a hankering to move home? I mean,
No,
this,
I mean, yeah, I mean, I have spent a lot more time there recently,
have
and
you?
yeah, you know, researching the book, it was, you know, a lot of time in the heartland, in
Uh-huh.
all these places, talking to people and interviewing people. But yeah, you know, I still have family there, so
Yeah, I know you
a
go there
little
in
bit of time.
holidays. I've seen pictures of your hometown where you have a tractor parade every 4th of July or something.
Oh
John
yeah,
sends posts them on Facebook, I think.
yeah, oh yeah, the tractors are still part of it. Unfortunately, some of these agricultural lands are going to be taken over by these tech factories.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Well,
Well,
have you
I'm
been
really
following?
sad about that, actually. I'm real sad about that.
Yeah. Have you been following any of the technological developments in agriculture? Because I think, some of the most interesting things about climate control, handling our climate issue, I think have to do with changes in farming technology.
Yeah.
So maybe that should be your next book.
Well, I I did talk to a company. It's a startup out of Pittsburgh, and they're in this vertical farming area.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so that's ag tech, you know,
I
and
had a
that's what.
talk show about 6 months ago between two people. I set it up because as a putting together two people that I knew would disagree because I talked to them separately. One of them was a guy who claims that the big corporations, the big food corporations, of course, there's just a handful of them that control all the food in the world practically.
Yeah.
And he says that they are really mindful of the need to develop uh, a better, like carbon farming kind of thing, where
Uh-huh.
keeping the carbon in the soil or new technologies for doing that. And my other friend is just anti-corporate and says no, the only people who are farming decently are small organic family farms. So I
Uh-huh.
put them together, and boy, they did not get on.
Uh-huh.
But it left me with the question. I put them together because I wanted to get an answer.
Yeah.
Are the corporations really aware of the fact that we have to make some real changes in farming technology? Or are they just, being self-centered and corporate? I don't
Uh-huh.
know whether you know the answer for that, but that's your next assignment.
Oh no, ag tech. Okay. Do I go back to the heartland to research this?
Yeah, yeah, that's
All,
another trip for you.
all those seed companies and right. You know, what am I thinking of? Conagra is one of those big agricultural companies.
I don't know the names. I used to know the names of them. Anyway, our time's up. We gotta
Okay.
go. Thank you. It's been fun.
Yeah, thank you, Meta.
Take
Great
care.
questions as always, and thanks for having me on the show.
Okay, enjoy
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Take
Take
care.
care now.
Bye. Project Save the World produces 2 of these shows each week, and this is episode number 500. Watch or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. People share information there about 6 global issues. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication, Peace Magazine. You can subscribe for $20 Canadian per year. Just go to pressreader.com on your browser, and in the search bar, enter the word peace. You'll see buttons to click to subscribe.